Welcome to our online audience. Thank you for tuning in. Yeah, special shout out to the online audience. Welcome. Woohoo! And sorry for keeping you waiting for 10 minutes. Yeah, so to those of you who are new to the forum, an extra special welcome. And those of you who have been here before, you could probably recite this with me by now. We are a socializing, networking, and skill-sharing community of data professionals in the broadest sense of both of those words. We cover all aspects of the data professions, from the technical, the data architecture, data modeling, data engineering, data science, to data ethics and artificial intelligence, data visualization and storytelling. It is our contention that if you work in the data profession in any of these subfields, all of these are relevant to you. And so we bring here speakers with something interesting to tell you about. We meet regularly at the last Wednesday of the odd-numbered months, which means our next meeting is at the last Wednesday of November. We meet irregularly whenever we can get it together, whenever there is a good occasion to. We have a Slack space I'm going to tell you about later, but first I want to tell you that we have a lot of benefactors helping us out. And first, I want to ask Andy to come here and tell you all about this venue that so graciously hosts us event after event. Here you go, Andy.
Lovely, thank you. So welcome everybody to Brighton Eagle Lab. Just a little bit about housekeeping first. So if you need the toilets, through the door on the right, go down the stairs and you'll see the toilets. If we happen to have a fire alarm go off, the Joker pub, quite a nice place to go. Okay, so that's the housekeeping done. A little bit about me. So I'm Andy, I'm the manager here at the Eagle Lab. We are a two-prong business really here. One is we are co-working. So we are sitting in our co-working area. We have the desks out for anyone to come and work. The other thing we are with Eagle Labs is we are like a business incubator. So we want to help businesses grow and scale. So whether that is we can offer you mentoring, we have different programs that we run throughout the year, and different programs. So if you want to look at raising some funds, we have a funding readiness program that you can go on. It's a 12-week course, and that will give you all the information that you need to decide whether you want to do some crowdfunding, or if you want to take a grant, or if you want investment. At that point, at the end of the course, you'll be given a chance to do your own pitch, which you can then put onto our digital demo site, which then we have over 480 investors, which log on to that site on a daily basis. And if they like your business and they like what you're saying, they get in contact and you get your investment. Yeah. If anyone wants any more information, yeah, I'm about. So come and grab me. I'll give you a card. We can connect. And hopefully, let's get your business to grow. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you, Andy. And thank you to Eagle Labs for the hospitality. Next, I want to tell you that the meetups, the Brighton Data Forum's home address is on meetup.com, and you probably signed up to this event through there. But we also have residents on Slack. We have a Slack workspace where we continue the conversations in between the events. This is also where we organize the occasional pub meet or a bicycle ride or a random walk or other such activities and discuss things data. So please welcome to join us on Slack, and when you do, please post something interesting. Another of our benefactors is the ever-present Silicon Brighton. And here to tell you all about Silicon Brighton is Alexandra. Silicon Brighton has supported the forum for years now and made an absolute revolution in what we can do. Take it away, Alexandra.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for having me. Just going to say a quick few words. So if you're not familiar with Silicon Brighton, we support nearly 30 meetup groups across the city now, and we aim to keep all of our events free. And we just flipping love it. We love this. We love the community. We love bringing people together, and we love hosting fantastic speakers like Andy. I'm really excited to see what tonight's going to bring. Should I do next slide on here? Yes. Thank you. And none of it would be possible at all without all of our fantastic members that we have. So if you're there, your company's there, give yourself a pat on the back. And if not, then no worries. If you're interested in becoming a member of Silicon Brighton to support the mission that we have to grow digital and tech growth in the city. Sorry, I get a little bit nervous when I talk in front of everyone, so I apologise if I trip over my words. But yeah, if you want to get involved, come and speak to me or go on our website and have a look. And definitely check out the other meetup groups that we support, because I'm sure there'll be something for everyone. And all of our organisers are absolutely fantastic. So even just to go and meet all of them, I would suggest to do that. And come on down, Oscar.
And yeah, thank you to Silicon Brighton. If you have interest in tech, there's going to be a meetup there for you. They have tons of events on their page. If they happen to not have your particular interest, contact them and start one, because that's what they'll do. They'll help you start up a meetup, get your peeps together to talk about your niche interest, like they did for the forum. Now, another of our benefactors is mpp.com. Are there any camera nerds or photographers in the group? Yay, yes. Great. I'm a big camera nerd, and I'm so thrilled that one of the premier locations to buy and sell used camera gear, lenses, bodies, lenses, lights, is based here in Brighton. And so my gratitude to mpp.com for their support of the forum. And finally, how did you enjoy the refreshments? Yeah, me too. So let's give it up for Rittman Mead Consulting. They've supported. They've sponsored the refreshments for the forum for over a year. No, year and a half, 2 years. I forget. They've been a very solid supporter, sponsor for us. They are a globally recognized consulting company. They are a knowledge center on all things Oracle and all things analytics, and as well as Apex for application building. Yes, again, thank you very much to Rittman Mead. And now, the main event is Andy Sexter, founder of Signoi. He's here to tell us about the magic and madness and beauty and horror. And I don't think there's a better introduction to him than that. Let's bring on the magic and madness.
Thank you, Oscar. Much appreciated. Thank you. I'm just going to swap over some slides here. So a little bit of background, first of all. I come from a background of market research and strategy. So over the last 20 years, I've set up, run, bought, sold various agencies that essentially focused on helping big companies market themselves and communicate better. Now, after I left my last company, I hooked up with Andrew Jevons, who I think many of you know, my business partner. And we have a shared interest in something called semiotics. And that is the main focus of what this business does in terms of deploying technology. Does anybody know what semiotics is? Apart from Andrew. Go.
Well, semiotics is the study of signs and symbols.
It is very much so. It's very much so. I'll give you an example. So if we consider a wasp, okay, what you would say is that the sign is the wasp. It is a wasp. It exists. It's an insect. But the thing that it communicates or signifies to human beings is perhaps something deeper. What could that be? Fear, danger, all of those good things. And that's why black and yellow tape is so common, right, as a signifier of warning. So that's a very simple kind of semiotic example. Now, this has traditionally been done by human beings, expert practitioners who really kind of curate small amounts of communication or stimulus very deeply using cultural expertise. Now, our philosophy is, well, you know, with all of the wonderful computing power and models available today, why can't we start to think about doing that at scale? And by scale, I mean not just a few tens or a few hundred images, but tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands. What can we do to kind of automate that and build upon it? And as many of you will know, the trick in that context is getting machines to see like humans. So here we see some stones, some water, a leaf. But what does it actually mean to a human being? How would they respond to it, do you think? How would you respond to it? What would you say about it? Pardon? Yoga studio. Well, that's a common enough response, I would argue, but it means for most people things like calmness, naturalness, okay, peace. And this maze is not just a maze, it signifies complexity and confusion and difficulty. So that's our kind of secret sauce, if you like, to take imagery and actually extract these kind of universal meanings from it, disregarding essentially the fact that it's still a picture of a maze or it's still some stones and rock. And to do that at scale. So we use our machine learning models to extract not only image descriptors like tags, but also adjectives. Obviously, color becomes important. Composition, complexity becomes important, and what we call the semiotic and emotional energies behind an image. So hedonism or nurture. And then a step deeper, what are the, for example, Jungian archetypes that are communicated by an image? These Jungian archetypes are very common in the world of marketing and advertising. They're used, you know, a lot for brands, right? So it's important, even if you don't necessarily believe in them, to be able to reflect them back to brands and say, well, you want to be an explorer? There you go. This is the sort of thing you've got to do. So I hope that gives you a little bit of a picture of how we work. And a very specific example. So we all know Twitter recently rebranded to X. Does anybody actually X? I don't think they do. We still tweet, right? We don't X. But feeding these simple logos through our platform and our model gives us a picture of what they represent. So the old bird, positive more than negative. Fun, self-expression, enjoyment, liberation. The new X seems to connote threat and vulnerability and isolation and danger. And these are real metrics, okay, which get a score for whatever you feed into it. Now, somebody, when I showed this to him, said, oh, well, it's about the X, isn't it? It's just about the X. Well, au contraire, because if you compare that with the Xbox logo, you get a completely different picture of the signifiers. Very, very different. So there's something going on here which is more about the fact, less about the fact there's an X, but more about how it is presented and executed. And in terms of those archetypes that I mentioned, you'll see Twitter is more of an explorer. It's about curiosity, self-expression, independence. Xbox is an everyman. It's a creator kind of archetype. And the new X, the new Twitter, suddenly has become a kind of ruler archetype. It's all about power. Does that make sense? You know, does that resonate, do you think? So it's all true. Well, this machine of ours actually does true things. Well, what I really wanted to talk to you about, now I've got that discussion sorted, is what we've been doing with Pinterest. So Pinterest is a very visual platform. And they commissioned us to do a really quite a big project, which was essentially about how they encourage the creators on Pinterest to obey the rules, right? And obeying the rules in the world of Pinterest is, how do we become more inspiring? They want to own the idea of inspiration on the internet. They want to be the place where people go for inspiration, okay? And at the same time, loads of their creators, who are essentially advertisers more often than not, who are making the money, are posting this absolute horror show of images, right? It's just not good enough for Pinterest. So they commissioned us with this brief. How do we actually understand and define what properties of pins are going to engage people more? Are they going to respond more positively to certain types of images? Now, we had 3 types of data here, right? So there's data in this presentation. It's not just, nonsense. We have the image properties, in other words, what we're reading out of these images, and it's a lot of pins, believe me, a lot of pins, very, very varied. What are we reading out of these images? Intersecting with a really big piece of market research where these pins are being fielded to people and people are being asked to rate them on various properties like visual appeal or how inspiring looking that image is. Okay. Then the third element is behavioral. How in platform are people responding to these pins? Are they saving them more? Are they clicking through more? Right. So an intersection of 3 very interesting bits of data to allow us to build this. So we went through a process of essentially, cutting a long story short, analyzing all of this, building a model to test on pins that had not been evaluated by human beings and to see how all that stacked up to give creative guidance. So, a few phases to this. So phase 1, and this is quite a good mechanism for analyzing images, is to start to think about clustering them according to archetypes. So, there could be an explorer cluster of images representing different elements of explorer, or there could be a caregiver cluster representing manifestations of those softer codes. And what we found at that very high level, there are certain types of imagery, and we'll get into this in a minute, that not only were rated very highly, so by top 2 box I mean 4 or 5 out of 5, okay, but also were more engaged with in the platform. So you can see a really quite an interesting correlation of those clusters with 2 distinct metrics. Metric 1, consumer ratings. Metric 2, how engaged are they within the platform with that pin? Interesting. Sure. Oh, okay. Yeah, is that better? Is that your live streaming thing? Okay, so that's all right. Where were we? What does a cluster analysis look like? Okay, so this is one for the data visualization people. So once we've run these analyses, we put it through the dashboard, and you can start to see these clusters of meaning emerging from all of that visual data. So to give you an idea, you can get structures here, you can start to build mood boards, start to visualize a very big complex visual data set. So if I then drill into a couple of these clusters, you can isolate them and then start to bring out examples. You can see themes starting to emerge. So there's a theme here about, the great outdoors, relaxation, enjoyment. There's a more physical theme over there, but both could be well received by different audiences. So to pull up a more detailed set of images here, you can see this cluster is, sharing a lot of codes of nature, relaxation, etc. So it's got a certain energy about it, hasn't it? And you can see that then come through these various metrics like hedonism, as I mentioned, the explorer code, indulgence, relaxation, quantitative metrics of what these images mean. Similarly, this one's more about power. It's more of a hero archetype, putting in courage and well-being. So once we've got all that data, we can start to think about how those things interrelate with what people actually think and what people actually do as a result. So from the research, we ended up with circa 220,000 individual ratings of various pins, these archetypal images. We already have now the visual metrics that we've extracted from those pins. So the goal is basically to say, well, take that data, how predictive can we be of people's attitudes to those images based on the properties of those images. So fairly typical modeling process. Dependent variable is how we would rate those images. Independent variables, all of the image properties like colors and archetypes and all those good things. So would it work? Good question. So having been through all that, we did a couple of things. Now this is a multinational study, and what we found is that certain markets like Brazil were just more positive in general about the things we were presenting them to them. And places like Japan were more negative or reserved in general. So we had to adjust for that a little bit. But what you see here is every pin adjusted for market differences according to the top quartile in blue for the positivity ratings, and the bottom quartile in yellow, and then a couple of quartiles in the middle. Okay, so first pass on the model, hurrah! Top quartile, bottom quartile. Really, really predictive of what were perceived as very good images or very poor images. Kind of good result, right? However, this middle bit, as is so common in modeling, is just a big mess, isn't it? So it's only barely better than, guessing, to be perfectly honest with you. So that led us down another path, which is to say, well, okay, we've got these different categories of pin, right, within the data. So it might be food and drink, or weddings, or home decor. Okay, which ones can we prioritize to really dig into at a category level? What's most interesting is Pinterest. So they decided that food and drink, women's fashion, and home decor were their most important sectors. By most important, it means they make them the most money, right? So Pinterest is not all altruism. They want to make money. We all want to make money. So, long story short, we then ended up reducing that data set down to segmented categories so that we could actually start to build a model that's specific to food and drink, for example. And you can see that immediately is improved, albeit on a smaller data set. And you can see and visualize the things that are much more important, much more inspiring within that category versus these other things. And this anchors very much in a caregiver kind of archetype. And again, a sense of joy. These are the kind of sorts of metrics that underpin this. Home decor, similar story. Much more aspirational. So that's one of the metrics, aspiration, versus things that are actually quite mundane or quite strange, right? So underpinning this somewhere behind the hood, it is deciding that the properties of these types of images are simply less inspiring than these. And looking at it as a human being, maybe you agree. I kind of do. And with women's fashion, it's a less clear picture because more things about individual taste and trend style come into play, but lover archetypes, glamour, indulgence, rather than this kind of slightly isolated and distracted modality down the bottom left. So that sharpened it up quite a lot. And this was the end result. Different models for different sectors, essentially different cluster types of images, operating at a reasonably high degree of reliability. We think. Remember, this is based on the research sample, okay? So what did we do then? Basically, take those models and deploy them on basket samples of 20,000 pins that had not been evaluated by human beings at all, okay? But did have the metadata of pin performance. In other words, how often they were saved, how often they were clicked through, etc., etc. And even because commercial project, they're all advertisers, they're paying to promote their pins, what actually is the return on investment and how does that intersect with these visual properties? So you can see a few of the top scoring pins there for food and drink, home decor. To cut a long story short, as we like to do, there's various behavioral metrics sitting on the platform. And once we'd converted those scores into a 1 to 10 scale, Okay, literally say bottom ones score 1, top ones score 10, everything in between. Okay, you can start to bucket up the performance metrics. So in that context, draw your attention to the big blue line here. Okay, and that big blue line is saves. In other words, people looking at a pin and saving it, which is basically the equivalent of an Instagram like in the Pinterest context. It's a really important measure for them. And you can see that line going up quite markedly against the average pin in the category as the inspiration score rises. And this is a predicted inspiration score. Okay, it's from our model. It's got nothing to do with human beings evaluating it anymore. That's a pure machine generated score. Same story for food and drink over there with a quite annoying blip at the end, but you know, we have to live with that, don't we, in the world of data? Not everything's perfect. Equally importantly, this grey line here is what they call hides. And this is when you're presented with a pin on the platform and you go, ugh, I hate that pin. And you can hide it, okay? And you can see the hides going down at each stage. And then finally, cost per 1,000. Remember, these are promoted pins a lot of the time. That's the little green line, okay? And in general terms, that also declines as the inspiration score increases. So the literal money shot for advertisers from this analysis is that by deploying these predictive models, okay, to essentially estimate how inspiring, how visually appealing, how good a pin is, actually markedly increases the amount of engagement per dollar. So they can put that in front of their advertisers and say, well, you know what, this is not just a hunch, okay? If you do these sorts of things, you will actually benefit financially. And that's now gone out to influence pretty much the whole of the advertiser content strategy within Pinterest. Now, to translate that a little bit, we then had to say, okay, enough hard data already. We'll translate that into kind of creative guidance for people who are quite creative. And then you have to kind of talk a different language, really. So, you know, develop essentially a playbook of what works, good examples, what doesn't work, you know, bad examples there. And also then translate that into things that might work across different categories. So we created a kind of an archetype called the joy giver, who's the kind of, you know, your friendly inspirer, if you like, for many audiences. And you can see how that runs across different categories like women's fashion, home decor, food and drink. But other archetypes are available as well, particularly in women's fashion. And that's one of the things we really had to unpick to accommodate this difference in kind of taste and presentation and trend. But at its most basic level, for example, yeah, really specific thing. All these social media platforms, and Pinterest no different, are awash with clickbait. And interesting that this emerged as a very specific cluster of images which contained lots of different images, right? Quite complex, okay? And the model gave it very low scores, which is kind of interesting because the individual images might actually share properties with other pins, but it's the combination and the complexity of that kind of clickbait category that made the difference. And what they get is very low saves. Yeah, people click on them because it's clickbait, it's literally clickbait, but they don't save them. So a clear bit of creative guidance to paid advertisers, and these are all paid adverts, right, is don't look like clickbait. You know, it may seem obvious in design terms, right, but there's so much of this stuff out there on Pinterest, and it's pretty clear that the algorithm says this is not going to work for you. So really clear, simple bit of creative guidance. Things that run across categories, again, you see. So, you know, reading a metric like how much text is occupying this image is quite important, actually. So you can overdo that. Too much text, too much text, too much text. Just enough text to keep the interest value going. And, you know, there's a case for simplicity, but not oversimplicity, if you see what I mean. You have to, in design terms, give people a bit of context for what you're advertising. So there's some very specific examples of how it's worked, and it has worked very well for them, and it's improved the quality of the paid ads. I'm not suggesting it's necessarily improved the quality of consumer pins, because people will pin what they want, but from the advertising point of view, it's improved the Pinterest case to receive advertising revenues, and it's improved the quality of their content. So what's next? Well, I kind of wanted to touch on generative AI, partly because it's really interesting and we're using it a lot as well, but partly because it's kind of now starting to swish out there into the world of Pinterest and Instagram and so on and so forth. And, you know, frankly, looking at some of this stuff, you'd struggle to identify it as an AI image, wouldn't you? I mean, it really is starting to get that good. Now, what's quite interesting here is that there's a built-in kind of positivity to the OpenAI models particularly, which means that they will generate things that they believe represent or speak to positive human emotions, okay, rather like that inspiration index that we built. And what's interesting here is a lot of these images, and there's loads of these, got loads of these, they kind of correspond to the things that people liked best in the survey. Again, could be quite obvious, right? But ask yourself why Lloyds Bank is the most consistently highly rated advertiser amongst the banks. No offense, Barclays, but it is. It's the horses, guys. And similarly, stick a puppy in an advert, you know you're going to get good results. Okay, super simple stuff. But it's interesting the way that it's these generative AIs are generating a certain type of content. But not always. We've come across some wonderful examples, actually, as we've been through our generative AI journey. And just in response to really simple prompts, right? I was doing a report about trends in wine-based cocktails. I wanted an image to represent it. Generate an analysis of trends in wine-based cocktails, and you get a slightly drunken analyst looking at some PowerPoint charts. I want a metaphor for innocence. On the good side, we get, you know, a rather nice, actually childlike depiction. On the left, we get a kind of dismembered set of babies and dolls. So at some level, it kind of is recognizing that there is an element of innocence here, but it's slightly gone off the rails, right? These kind of hallucinations are still quite rife. A person wearing bunny ears. That's a nice, sweet image, isn't it? This one looks like Salvador Dali, doesn't it? Even a simple prompt like two people drinking and laughing together in a bar can give you anything between normal people and dangerous lunatics. And last but not least, we talked about animals, didn't we? A cat stretching. And this is my favorite. This is a project we did with Weber. Grilling with loved ones, ladies and gentlemen. And at some level, behind the scenes, it's obviously thinking barbecue, grilling, hot dog, you know. It's kind of giving you what you asked for in a really, truly horrible way. Anyway, I'm kind of going a bit off topic here, but just back to Pinterest. A few interesting points here. So they're all about inspiration. Okay, it's never been measured properly before. It's interesting that we can measure and actually predict now likely visual appeal of these things. Even more interesting is that it has a strong relationship with real commercial outcomes, and that it can be translated into real creative guidance. And interesting but warning signal is because a lot of the generative AIs follow the same embedded logic. Okay, what we're going to see and what we're already seeing is an issue, I think, within the content that's generated on these platforms, unless things are absolutely clearly labeled as AI made, right? And we've seen the quality of the stuff that these models can produce. Unless they're clearly labeled as AI made, what does that mean for the inspiringness of Pinterest if it's being inundated by essentially fake inspiring images? To be discussed, but it's something they're worried about because ultimately they want to be all about authenticity. Well, I hope you found that interesting, guys. I'm done. Thank you. Maybe you have questions. Oh, lots of questions. Join the queue.
I have questions at both ends of it, I guess.
Okay.
So I'm interested in knowing how you're analyzing the images loosely semantically, I guess. And the second one is how you're transferring that set of variables into Jungian archetypes. I noticed you're not using the correct archetypes, using the advertiser-friendly ones. I wondered how that process works between a set of variables.
Yes, I mean, certain things I obviously can't, give away totally. Let me put it that way. But like anything else, it's about translating annotations into a model. And that's something that's we've developed over a period of some years. And then how you fine tune that is oftentimes dependent on particular projects or building up a wider bank of examples. I think, Andrew, top of the head, 1 million images have we analyzed, do you think, since we've been on this, roughly? Easily, he says. Easily. So the more you do it, obviously the better it gets. And then sorry, what was the other question?
Well, how you transfer these set of variables about the image into a particular Jungian archetype.
Well, essentially it's the same story, isn't it? It's about kind of annotation, right? One form or another. So there exists a thing, for example, called, let's take universalism as one of the cultural values from the Schwartz studies, kind of anchored in symbolism around fairness and nature and justice and so on and so forth. So if you can kind of, have those essentially, as partly as tags, then you can measure really how close archetypal images are to any other image. And you could use, for example, vector approaches for that to reduce it down as well. So that's the kind of applies to quite a few of the things we do, actually. It's a good question.
Something like that.
I'm here all day.
How do you predict what is going to come next? Obviously, you have all the data for what's now, what's popular now, everything like that. But how do you know what's going to come next? How do you know, or your algorithm knows when it has shifted, when it has changed to something else, when something else is more popular than what was previously most popular?
Yeah, it's a very good question because, another thing we do quite a lot of is trends work, right? So that could be visual trends, but it could also be cultural trends that manifest themselves in new ways, right, for new generations. And we're starting to look at things like TikTok as well for that kind of approach. And I think it's a very valid question, and it's something I think that will become more important as culture changes more rapidly in the coming years, even months. What would be a good example? And you can kind of spot these and understand them. So a good example would be, okay, codes of nature, right? So really, really took off during COVID in the home. Okay, so in Pinterest's home decor category, there's a sudden spike of interest in what they call biophilia, so it's nature coming into the home. You can understand why, because everyone's kind of locked down and thinking, oh, blimey, I wouldn't mind being outside a bit, right? So the plants come into the home, there's more connection with the outside. And at the same time, interest in open plan living designs dropped away completely for very similar reasons. Now, neither of these two things well, they have shifted a little bit. So open plan living designs have come back a little bit. But what I call biophilia as an interest category has stayed as an emerging trend. And that's super important to understand because, these big contextual shifts, and I'm not talking about cool hunting as a trend, but these big contextual shifts can really affect things short and long term.
On the theoretical background behind the archetypal signifiers you have used, I was wondering whether you have used a specific work as the basis for those, or whether it's something that you have developed in-house. And if yes, kind of, if you can tell us something about the process to get there.
Yeah, it's something we developed in-house. And you start off basically with all these things, for these metrics, by kind of reading them and understanding them, right? So what are the concepts and the signifiers behind a particular archetype? And obviously, you know, in my previous agency life, I was doing a lot of this by careful inspection and kind of human sorting of images, if I can put it that way, right? But as you start to kind of build up banks of things that make sense, then it also makes sense to use those as kind of anchor points for a measurement, if you see what I mean. So if you imagine, imagine the most archetypal image of a caregiver you can imagine, right? Which could be a mother cradling a child, okay? And then surrounding that, there's other things that signify caregiving, and it could be self-care, okay? Using that as a kind of anchor point for the metric lets you essentially say, well, actually, this image is very close to the caregiver archetype. This image is not. This image is, in fact, more of a hero archetype, to kind of pursue that argument. So that kind of continues to develop, as you can probably imagine. But we've actually got, I showed you the Jungian ones, and I know I kind of maged on those because they're quite popular and well known. But there's about, I should know this really, there's about 122 archetypes. 122 archetypes in the box, and they just come into play, you know, for different projects really. And some are negative, as you saw with the Twitter example. And brands don't often want to hear about that, as you can imagine. They like the fluffy positive archetypes. So we call those shadows.
Right. Yeah, I'm not sure if you can talk about this because it might be commercially sensitive, but I'm just interested in what your network architecture looks like. I'm assuming this is some sort of neural network they're using here, some sort of deep learning, is my guess. Are you able to talk about, first of all, you know, how this thing was trained? No. All right.
This honestly, this is our kind of our selling point. I can talk in very general terms about this, and I can also tell you that we're integrating this into some of the generative AI models as well.
That was going to be my second question. Yes. Yeah. Are you training LoRa's based on what you've got? Because you've got.
Am I training? Sorry.
Well, you have a bunch of data. Yeah. Categorized into clusters, which you seem to have done. Like you could take those clusters and you could train a LoRa in order to take one of the base models and create.
Absolutely,
which would be fantastic.
Well, you know what? One of the things that we're really interested in. Okay, and I'm a slight tangent here, but we also analyze a lot of really bulky text. Okay, so it might be like big wadges of social, or which we get off Brandwatch. Hundreds of thousands of things, right? Or it could be big wadges of, you know, survey data, like net promoter score data. So the question is then, you've got all this text, how do you kind of bring it to life and create an automated summary? And, you know, we've made really good headway with that, with what we call Mr. Toad, okay, who has a kind of amphibious cunning in terms of swimming through his pools of data. But the crucial thing here is, hey, let's flip it on its head. And instead of just saying, here is a summary of some data and it speaks to these human needs and you need to do this, why not actually get it to generate images that actually bring it to life, right? And that then led us down the path of saying, hey, if we can do that, why can't we actually build personas, right, that represent particular clusters or segments? You know, do it, if not in the blink of an eye, but certainly much quicker than the human being could do. And that's led us down some other commercial paths. So with our client Weber, the barbecue people, where I got that terrible barbecue image, actually. they've got 8 particular segments in their market. So what we've done is basically develop a set of personas to represent the variability within those segments. And those personas are really quite compellingly lifelike. And I won't claim to take all the credit for that by any means, but this is the way the generative AI stuff kind of opens up some really interesting possibilities for our clients.
Oh, thank you.
Pleasure. Hello.
Can you hear me? So first of all, I wanted to know, when you are looking at all this complicated models and results that you get, how do you decide what's interesting and what to put in front of someone who's not technical, or someone who just wants a quick answer of what they do? And my second thing is, what tools do you use to visualize that data? Because those are some pretty nice graphs.
Thank you very much. Well, okay. The dashboards that spin out largely automatically generated, and that's the main kind of resource for clients. So what they want to be able to see, in essence, most of the time is, what are the themes that are going on in this data? Okay. And what does it mean for me? So you can then create a dashboard that is for your clients based on their data, or let's say it's innocent drinks or something, and you can compare that to, say, Tropicana and get a positioning out of it. So some of it's, you know, comes from the automation process, but then when you get into the more complicated models, my basic philosophy is, like, if they want to see the working, they can see the working, but more often than not, they want kind of 3 slides that tell a story. Okay. And that can still be quite a manual process, if you know what I mean. So we're not at the stage where the machines can do all the interpretation, and they certainly can't necessarily translate into the answers to a client's marketing brief. Okay. But it takes all that heavy lifting out of it, and it gives them a nice resource to play with. And frankly, with semiotics, a lot of the challenge, a lot of the time, is believability. So a client will listen to a qualitative presentation about semiotics and say, well, where's the data, lads? Where's the data? Okay, and this then literally gives them the data.
Thanks for the presentation. I was going to ask if there were any things that you maybe would have predicted that would have done very well that actually did terribly. So you might not be able to talk about the things that are like profitable or whatnot. But are there any insights that maybe were kind of funny, or that you didn't expect?
Yeah, we don't do fun. This is serious business, you know. Yeah, well, actually, the clickbait thing in Pinterest serviced a veritable horror show. It really did, and it ultimately became the sort of thing where we shared a few of these things, right, and then just basically took them away completely. So, for example, they had no clue that there was so much not safe for work content in the platform, right? They had no clue that people were using it for their personal porn collections, for example. So we uncovered all sorts of interesting things. Actually, another one project we did with Diageo, okay, and it was about whiskey brands. A particular whiskey brand, it's Buchanan's, I think it was. Yeah, and we were focusing in on the Latino community in the US and, you know, obviously South America, right? So we did 2 things. One is we took the various whiskey brands' Instagram feeds. Okay, we analysed those, and they're all very civilized, these Instagram feeds. As you can imagine, they're promoting whiskey as a kind of high-end item for dinner parties. You got sophisticated people sitting in bars. And then we downloaded all this user-generated content from Latin America, and it was just people stumbling out of nightclubs. You know, it's about as off-brand as you could possibly imagine. And as part of that, we also picked up an influencer called Jay Belvin, who is a reggaeton musician, as I'm sure you all know. And he was supposed to be their brand ambassador, right? So there's Buchanan's, they're all being nicely middle class and high end with their presentation. You've got the consumers kind of staggering around drunk, clutching these bottles of Buchanan's, and then you've got Jay Belvin, who's basically presenting a load of gangland imagery on his Instagram feed. So, long story short, he's no longer an influencer for Buchanan's. And most interestingly, we picked up something, again, they weren't aware of. It was something called Bucanias, right? And Bucanias, they'd never heard of it. I'd never heard of it. It's actually like a Mexican hooch that's kind of brewed in the barrios, and it's presented in a plastic bottle that looks a bit like Buchanan's, and that's how it picked it up. A very popular drink, I'm told, in Mexico City. Anyway, there's a few little rambling anecdotes.
Any other questions? Charlie,
thank you very much, guys.
Anything from the internet? All right. Well, in that case, I think we'll give Andy a warm hand again thanks for his presentation. Thank you, Andy, especially for living up to each of the words in your title. I wasn't expecting the horror. Andrew tried to warn me, but magic and madness for sure. The conversation continues over at Unbarred. So if you are at all interested, then we'll be headed out to Unbarred across the street here. Don't worry, the regulars will know. The regulars know the way. Just follow the crowd, and I'll join you. I'm going to tidy up here a little bit. I'm going to join you there in a little bit, and we're going to have a chat there because I have questions too. So, but this is it for now. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for making these events fun. And till next time. Bye-bye.